In part 3 of this webinar, we're going to be talking about the role of the ACL, why women are more susceptible than men to ACL tears, and other really important factors that contribute to how at risk we are for an ACL tear. So let's talk about what the ACL helps out with in the body. And one of the big things it does is help that tibia or shin bone from moving too far forward. It also helps out in making sure that it doesn't rotate too far inward. Very importantly, it helps keep us from hyperextending the knee. And lastly, another big one is to make sure it does not have excessive knee valgus, or basically keep the knees from coming too far inward. Okay? Keywords being they're too far. So knees can definitely come in and out. They're made to do that. They're meant to do that. But we don't want to go too far to where the ACL cannot handle it. That's different for everybody, and especially depending on how much proper training you've had. So let's move on into why women are more susceptible. And it starts right at the bone structure. So the Q angle of the hip places more stress on the knees in women. Just simply the way that their bone structure is puts more stress onto the knees, and that's something that we're going to have to account for. They also typically have smaller thigh muscles and less developed thigh muscles. So not only do they have extra stress because of their bone structure, but less help because of typically less developed thigh muscles. And when this extra stress is put on the knees and they have less help from the thigh muscles, predominantly this stress falls onto the ligaments in the knee, predominantly the ACL. And lastly, and kind of more obviously, when the ACL can't handle this additional stress, it tears. So what other factors contribute to an ACL injury? We start with a big one, and that's improper reconditioning and conditioning programs. We know that our knees get put in vulnerable positions out on the field, maybe not a whole bunch in a game or a whole lot of times, but maybe once or twice, and those are times that we have to be prepared for, and our training has to prepare us for those vulnerable positions that we'll be in, to make sure that we'll be able to stay safe and continue to play confidently throughout the game and not suffer an injury. Next, a big one, lacking mobility in the foot and the hip regions. So the knee's really just kind of stuck in the middle. And its performance really depends on how well the foot is doing its job and how well the hip is doing its job. And if one of them or both of them aren't doing as good a job as they could be, or as good a job as they should be, that leaves the knee highly vulnerable and really open to injury. And this kind of continues with that same philosophy where really the knee's part of the system, and if we don't have proper strength and power in the core and lower extremities, again, that sets the knee up for possibly a potential injury. So when we look at training, and we'll talk more about this in future slides, it's not just training the knee kind of as an isolated unit. It's training the whole system to make sure that our core, our lower extremities, our foot, our hip are helping out that knee, and that the knee is helping out those other parts of the body. Everything's working harmoniously together rather than just kind of individually. And if they're just trained individually, or they're not trained to work together, again, that can lead to us being more vulnerable. And lastly, neuromuscularly, are we putting the knee in positions that it will be in, or the body in positions that it will be in out on the field? Are we putting them in functional positions in training to match what they'll be going through on the field neurally? If not, the body may not know how to respond properly. So, as we move on to part 4 of the webinar, we'll be looking at what improper training looks like and what proper training looks like.